Howdy everybody, how y'all doing? Welcome to the Ice House, where we try to keep things cool, calm, collected, and mostly a bit chill, right? Well, I'll tell you what, I've been trying to keep pretty chill lately, and that's kind of meant that I've stayed off a bit of the parasocial network, if you will. Now, I feel like lately it's been not so much the drama farming and the reaction to the reaction videos for clicks, likes, and dopamine hits. It seems more like it's reaction to the reaction of things because of the emotional escalation of current events and, well, each side holding an opinion and, well, as you can tell, I don't necessarily would say that it's a pendulum swinging, because pendulums don't usually swing that fast. I think it feels a little bit more like the pendulum was sitting through an earthquake, and just everything's kind of getting knocked over and in a tizzy, and people are still trying to figure out which way is up and what's actually going on, right? Yeah, I'm sure you guys can feel it too, right? Which might be why that, if you guys follow along at home, if you caught my PSA yesterday, that instead of saying something like I've said before, that what you put on the internet is permanent, so be careful because you never know how might that, what the fallout of that could be, right? I don't think I need to remind anybody about that currently, right? Or doing something in public that maybe was something that was meant to be private, and because now it's seen and plastered all over everything, you can't go back, right? And I don't know, I know, like I said, that we all just kind of want to live our lives and go about our business, and like I said, instead of reminding you of something that you probably already know right now, I was choosing to, well, as cliche as it sounds, try to be the change that you want to see in the world. Because I think one of the things that we definitely need right now, and I know that it's a little bit difficult because there's a lot of you guys out there that are probably still reeling and still caught up in some of these conversations, and the emotional, well, just processing the things somebody says, and like I said, the things, how the conversation is escalating in a way that it seems on a level absurd, but the absurdity that isn't fun, right? The overreacting and now more name calling and more blaming, and the sides are saying it's all your fault and all your faults, and I mean, it seemed like, kind of like the title of this video, but it seems like just a few months ago that anytime you would see, well, any side really, anytime they had a perceived win, you'd hear that some people would start saying that, the world is healing and finally things are getting a little bit more sensible. And I mean, I kind of think there's a point where maybe that phrase gets overplayed, because if the world is healing when we're okay but somebody else might not be, maybe it's not the right term, right? And so I'm kind of asking and pondering about it in a way that is the world really healing, right? Is the world getting better than it's always been, or better than it's been lately? I mean, has it been lately any worse than it's always been? Or is it just certain things that have been not on our doorstep, but we've seen around the world in other countries, or, in other borders, right, have come now inside our borders, and the people in our country are doing things that we kind of just thought we could, tweet about and say that, we're aware of it, and then go about our business, right? I mean, that might sound a little callous, but I think we have all seen it done, and we still see it done, because it's really easy to say something online and acknowledge it, and it's much different than actually having to deal with the ramifications of, that sort of action or event happening on our own soil or right in front of us, right? And so I'm not trying to be negative and say that the world's a terrible place. Well, what I'm trying to say is, maybe things kind of ebb and flow, and they've kind of been the way they've always been in a certain way, and sometimes it's the complacency that thinking that we can just coast and things will just get better, right? And then something like this happens that we realize that, how did this happen? Why is this happening so close to home, right? And instead of trying to figure out why is this happening so close to home, how can we not, make it not happen so close to home? It's we're getting into the whole blaming each other for different things and scapegoating somebody else, because it's much easier to just point at somebody else when things aren't going our way, right? When we're not having that win, and doesn't feel like the world is healing, that it's got to be somebody else's fault, right? And I mean, newsflash, I think there's that whole we're all in this together sort of deal, right? And I don't know about you, but just watching from the sidelines, some of the emotional escalation, some of the reactions to the overreactions, and well, I get it, right? I understand there's a lot of people invested, right, in not only what they believe in their side, but also there's a lot of people out there that do actually care and want to see things get better. But the most difficult part is when we don't agree on how to make that happen, right? And if we don't agree on how to make things better, sometimes instead of figuring out how to work together, we have a tendency to make things worse, because if you're not for me, you're against me, which in a lot of ways is kind of a silly concept, when for like at least 70-80% of all the things we mostly align fairly well, right? Maybe even up to 90%, but sometimes it's that 5% that makes all the world of the difference, that we have to figure out why we're different, and therefore can't associate with people. And I think maybe the division and the intentional division, and trust me, I get it. Punk's in the name, so I went through an angsty youth phase where I didn't want people to understand me or think they understood me, and so I had to sort of try to carve my own way, which ironically is probably the way a lot of people sort of decided to carve their own way. And in your own sort of self-discovery and your own sort of trying to figure it out for yourself, you end up again walking a similar path to a lot of people, right? Because finding out for yourself doesn't mean that you're going to end up way off in left field compared to everybody else, because when you kind of have a reasonable head on your shoulder and you're looking at the evidence, and you're not, maybe you haven't chosen a camp yet or not trying to pick a side, there's the ability to have a reasonable conversation and relate to those that don't actually agree with you 100%. And I don't know. I think, again, that's more key about, being able to talk to people and accept that, that 5, 10, 15, 20% of things that we don't fully agree on, that it's okay, right? That we can figure out how to amicably move forward in a way. Because, well, let me tell you, from personal experience, have figured out most people, not almost everybody, you know. I don't know necessarily anybody who agrees with me on everything 100% of the time. And if I needed 2 or 3 people like that, or a whole group of people like that, I'd probably end up feeling pretty lonely, right? Because I'd never find that, and I'd try to fit in a place where I could pretend like I, agreed with more, and tried to focus on the things that maybe I do agree with, and then, if I doubled down and, said that I have to fit in this camp because I chose this camp, but I don't even agree with this camp, but I definitely don't agree with the other camp because obviously when I chose this camp, that camp was way off in left field. I mentioned earlier that you're not actually that farther away from each other than we realize sometimes when we're trying to find the minute differences to prove why we're not somebody else. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm just rambling as a little bird here. Maybe it's... I understand that these conversations need to happen. I understand that they're important. But I also don't think that just reacting and overreacting and spiraling is gonna help us come to any real and valid solution any quicker than trying to blow off steam and, I don't know, maybe be honest in the fact that none of us might have this right, and maybe instead of trying to come to our own conclusions before we even listen to somebody else that we don't want to listen to or agree with, that, I don't know, without the help of other people who can see things from a different angle and perspective, we might not be able to figure it out on our own. But I don't know. And I think that's kind of the plight of living in general, right? Trying to figure out how to do things on your own, realizing you can't do things on your own, and then, hopefully figuring out people that you can trust and connect with and actually form a community that doesn't cause you to feel more isolated along the way, right? So, yeah. I don't know. Maybe that's helpful. Maybe that's not helpful. But, like I said, so I think that the world is falling apart at any quicker rate than it was, before, or is it healing and things are getting better and we're just having growing pains? I don't know. I can't necessarily give the evidence that either or is happening. I just think that we're kind of in a bit of a bad run here because we've been trying so hard and so desperately to not get along that the result of trying not to get along are what get us to, all the arguments we're having right now, right? So, do I have the answer to figure out how we can get along and how we can all be friends? I wish I did. But maybe just having the thought and the conversation, maybe being fun and silly and not trying to take life so seriously, and whether you're a dancing person or not, and whether you want to go dance like nobody's watching just because it might be funny to be absurd and make people wonder what the crap's going on, right? Maybe that's not your style, but maybe doing something that is just a little bit more fun and lighthearted and reminds people that we're still human and that there's really a bigger purpose than figuring out how not to get along, right? So, that's really all I got. Hope that made enough sense. So, if you got any thoughts or comments, I'd love to hear them. You can put them down below if you want to like, subscribe, or share this out. That would be awesome. And, just keep taking care of yourself and keep taking care of others, and even looking out for people that you may not agree with because they're people too, and maybe they're having a bad day and you can help them feel like a person, even if you may never agree with them on everything, right? It's just a thought. Well, until next time, see you later. Bye!